Hey there, folks. We're actually being joined here in one of our interviews for our intellectual property protections course by Mr. Tom Stephenson, CEO of Pajarito Powder. Tom's been gracious enough to come on today for this interview and talk about licensing because his organization has had really great experience licensing and being able to take that on, take that further. And rather than hear it from me, you're actually going to hear it from Tom. So, Tom, first of all, thank you so much for being able to join us today. Really appreciate it. If you could just introduce yourself and introduce your company real fast for the audience.
Sure, Dale, my pleasure. Glad to be here today. So Pajarito Powder is a fuel cell and electrolyzer catalyst company. And so we make catalysts for the hydrogen economy. If you look at the components, right, so depending on how much experience you have with fuel cells or with electrolyzers, particularly in transportation, they represent another approach to electrifying and decarbonizing transportation. But the challenge that has always existed for either electrolyzers to produce hydrogen in a green fashion or fuel cells to consume that hydrogen and produce the electricity to run the vehicles is the expense. And the expense has been driven by the precious metal catalysts that are in those systems. And so what we've done is we've started a company which is making novel advanced catalysts that allow us to reduce the amount of precious metal, get the most effectiveness out of the precious metal, and deliver better results ultimately for our customers.
That is an awesome and amazing technology. And, for our audience here with our clean energy cluster, I think that really does speak towards the needs for how do we provide better economies of scale, if nothing else, for our typical ways, because there's going to be some learning curves there. There's going to be some stuff we're going to have to do to get towards that clean and green future. So I think that with what you're going to talk about today really does lend a lot towards the potential audience we have and what they're going to be working on, the kind of fields and domains that their innovation is going to really house itself in. And kind of speaking of innovation, so Tom, I understand that Pajarito actually licensed a technology from one of the federal labs to get this started, kind of get going. Could you talk about that process real quick about how did you go about licensing technology as a small business from a federal lab?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, Pajarito actually has technologies from multiple that we've licensed from multiple different sources. It includes Los Alamos National Laboratory. It includes the University of New Mexico here in Albuquerque, where the company is based. And it includes an organization called INRS based in Montreal, Canada. And our particular experience with the national labs, was really related to the genesis of the company. It was an interaction that I had with Piotr Zelenai from LANL, who's one of the staff members there and is chairman of our technical advisory board, that led to our deciding that what we really needed to do was license out the technology and see if we could pursue the opportunities associated with it. And actually, for people who are familiar with Los Alamos National Laboratories is located on Pajarito Mountain, which is the origin of the name Pajarito Powder for our company. And to your question, the process is sort of interesting because we actually at first looked at trying to do an exclusive license. And for exclusive licenses, that can often be a challenge, but we found that we were able to work on a non-exclusive license. And Los Alamos, in particular, with what they've done at the Feynman Center, is that they've created a series of templates. And the process of actually going through licensing on a non-exclusive basis for a technology is pretty straightforward. You fill in all of the economics, you negotiate those pieces, and it drops into the template. And as long as you're comfortable with that, then it's pretty straightforward. I think one of the most important things to take away relative to licensing from any institution, whether it's one of the laboratories or whether it's a university or some other organization, is to understand a couple of key elements of the technology that you're licensing. First and foremost, where is it protected? Is it protected only in the United States, or is it protected worldwide? And then second of all, do you need an exclusive license, or will a non-exclusive license do? And they're very different business models that evolve depending on particularly the second one of if you opt for an exclusive license or a non-exclusive license. People tend to go and say, oh, I must have an exclusive license. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. If there's a lot of work that has to be done around the commercialization, the scale-up process, modifications, perhaps a non-exclusive license is adequate for what you need.
And kind of, that actually brings up something that is really interesting, because you did say that you've licensed from not only Los Alamos, but you've also licensed from UNM, as well as, a company in Montreal. So given that you've had this experience with these three different types of organizations, because anyone that has never gone through the process should probably know that there is not a one size fits all when it comes to licensing, and even within, particular types of organizations, but across the process for a federal lab looks very different than the process that exists for a university, which looks totally different than the process that looks like whenever you're licensing from, a company. So kind of having worked across all those different, let's just call it fields there, what's one thing you wish you would have known before you started looking at even potentially licensing technology from another organization?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, one of the things that, obviously, one of the components that's associated with any licensing agreement that you'll do is a number of different elements of the economics. So depending upon the organization, it may be possible to do an equity deal. There's almost always some sort of upfront payment. And then there's a royalty stream over time. And those royalty streams will generally have minimums associated with them. And when you first set the minimum, you have a projection and an expectation of how the business is going to grow. And it's never as good as you think it's going to be. It certainly wasn't for us. And it hasn't been in any company that I've been involved in. And so, one of the most important things to know going in is sort of how flexible the licensing organization can be at the times when you need to go and make modifications to the license, and how sort of under competitive pressure it is has a big impact on the willingness of the organization to make those adjustments over time. So you say, okay, look, these minimums are producing a real burden for us because we're now 4 or 5 years out, and we thought, sure, by 4 or 5 years, we're going to be making millions and millions of dollars. And in fact, we're not. We're just sort of in the early stages of product into the marketplace. And so knowing the organization and some of their history and some of their licensing is I think, probably the most important thing for anyone to be aware of, particularly from a small business perspective, since this does represent a core of what's going to be the base of your own intellectual property and your product base going forward. I think that sort of, beyond that, this sort of understanding of potentially how flexible the licensing organization can be. And I think it's really important for licensing organizations to understand that these changes happen in any startup. They just don't evolve as quickly as you would hope that they do, or the startup would hope that it does. I think that beyond that is probably to understand what the potential support looks like within the organization to be able to help you do the commercialization. Because the license is a piece of paper that gives you the rights associated with being able to practice that particular technology. But your ability to actually turn that into a product depends upon your ability to take that out and then start to make it, start to scale it up. And so what are the policies that the organization has around professionals who work in their organization, either leaving the organization and becoming part of the startup company, or doing part-time work while still remaining at the institution and also working with the startup company, because that level of involvement is pretty critical. And in the best cases, having some direct support mechanisms where there may be funds available to help the company start that process of doing the commercialization and then ultimately the scale up. One of the things that the federal laboratories have challenges with are some of their rules about fairness of opportunity in particular. And as a result, it makes it very hard for them to license to a company that has, without a period of time when the technology is sort of broadly available for licensing. It's historically had challenges then to license to individuals who may have come out of the laboratory to start up the company. And we didn't have that challenge, so that wasn't a problem for us, but it is something that I've seen with other companies as they've gotten going in the past.
You bring up a really great point there, and something that I think is important for people to kind of consider when they're looking at licensing is that just level of support, that level of access that they get. So Arrowhead Center is also the intellectual property arm for the New Mexico State University system. And I know that's one of the conversations we always try to have with potential licensees is, look, you're not just getting the technology. Once you get the technology in your hands, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to move it forward? What are those conversations that you're going to have with the inventors? Because there's a huge difference between getting a patent and going, yeah, I understand this, and actually talking with the person that did the work, invented it, was in the lab and said, this is what I did, this is what I know, this is how I know it operates. It's kind of that difference between you reading about something and then you hearing it firsthand from somebody that experienced it. One is, very kind of segregated and dry, and the other one is extremely valuable information, something that you can actually action on. And so speaking of valuable, with these different licenses that you've had, has the licenses actually been a valuable asset for Pajarito?
Absolutely. Different ones at different levels, and they've taken on sort of different forms over time. But what we've tried to do is to make sure that we could capture a number of, in our particular case, a number of different techniques for producing some of the core components that ultimately go into our final catalyst products. Now, what's interesting is that the patents were originally intended for catalyst materials that would use no precious metal at all. And when we started the company, and this is sort of an example of how things will pivot over time, that was the product that we thought that we would be making would be a catalyst that had no precious metal in it at all. But what the market told us, what the automobile companies and others told us, was that no, what we really do need is we need you guys to work on something that may not eliminate the precious metal, but allows that precious metal to be a lot more effective. And so we did some pivoting away from that, but that still utilized the core capabilities of the different technologies that we've licensed. And again, some more than others. I think one of the things to remember too is that there are indirect benefits that you'll see from licensing, particularly from a premier institution like a national laboratory or a well-known university. And that's a marketing benefit. So Los Alamos National Labs is extremely well known, and not just within the United States, but worldwide. And so having that license as part of the basis of the technologies that we are using to create our products provides an added measure of credibility for a startup company that's just getting going. And that's critically important when you're trying to get those initial introductions into customers, the people that are going to actually buy your product, to be able to get their attention, because that license capability, well, okay, if this was originally developed at Los Alamos National Laboratories, if this was originally developed at the University of New Mexico, then I have a stronger degree of confidence that it's really high quality intellectual property than I would if it was just started by a couple of people working in a garage. Might be, right? I mean, a couple of people working in a garage can change the world by all means, but you don't have that same sort of built-in credibility from day one when you don't have that.
Yeah. And I think that's a really amazing point to bring up, and something that I know a lot of people kind of struggle with when they talk about their technology is when they are actually going out there and talking to the customers, one of those questions is going to be, well, how'd you come up with this? And as you said, yeah, three dudes in a garage can develop some amazing things. But when you say, oh yeah, me and my buddies were just sitting around in the garage one day and said, wouldn't this be cool? Sometimes you can kind of see that customer go, wait, what?
Maybe.
So kind of given that, Tom, if you could have kind of one final piece of information, or just one of those encapsulating final thoughts, that kind of Jack Handy quote, what would it be and why?
Know the IP that you're licensing and know how you're going to get it to market. I think that, can I elaborate on that?
Yeah, sorry. I was going to just jump in. I was like, was that it?
Well, let's see. You asked for one line, so
True.
So I tried to provide you with one line. I mean, this harkens back a little bit to the first question that you asked and my answer to it. And one of the things that I really want to elaborate on a little bit is when I talk about knowing your technology. This returns back to the question of an exclusive license or a non-exclusive license. But the other thing that's really important to understand increasingly in today's world is the question of whether or not you just have domestic US patent protection or you have international patent protection. And one of the challenges in working with the laboratories is that they have very limited resources for patenting, particularly relative to the huge number of disclosures that they often get. And as a result, their intellectual property protection is very focused on the domestic market in the United States and only providing that patent protection in the United States. If you're close enough to when the technology is first being disclosed, then you can potentially license it fast enough to be able to then convert that into international patent protection yourself. But if it's been out there longer than the 12 months, then you really can't do it unless you develop new technology. Now, by contrast, one of the things that the University of New Mexico has done, and INRS in Montreal, which is an educational institution as well, is to implement that international patent protection and spend those dollars. Now, why is that important? Well, for an industry like the one that we're in, I have more customers in Asia and in Europe than I do in the United States. A small percentage of what we ship every year is in the United States. It's much more focused on these customers in Japan, in Korea, in Germany, in the UK, in France, and Canada. And so that ability to have international patent protection becomes pretty important for what we're doing as a business. Now, not every business has that issue, right? Other businesses may be able to really focus in on the domestic American market, and therefore the patent protection within the US is adequate. I can tell you, we've spent many tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, on patent protection globally for these technologies that we've licensed. And so it is an expensive choice, but it's clear that in the industry that we're in, it's a critical one. And that may not be true for all. So when you talk about knowing your technology that you're looking to license, that includes understanding the marketplace where ultimately it's going to go, and whether it's international, whether it's domestic, how much additional work is going to be done, whether you're going to put blocking IP around it for which a hunting license in the form of a non-exclusive license is adequate. And these are questions that need to be answered as much as possible on the front end to be able to make sure that you get the most out of the technology that you license from an institution.
And that is a really great point, because one of the things that we've kind of talked about throughout some of the other modules and the training we've developed for this course is that many people will get in their head that, and this isn't just for, technology and licensing, it's for, grants and, non-dilutive funding like SBIRs. They go, this is my business. And one of the things that, I've tried to set up throughout this is patenting and going after protections, licensing, kind of moving that needle on the technology. It's part of your business. It's not the business itself. You have to know the business process. You have to know the business reasons. And you want to license, you want to patent when it makes sense for your business to actually move forward. And I think that you ending with the know your market, know your customer, and know where that customer is a perfect way and a perfect example of just that. Your organization knew where your market was, you knew where your customer was. And as you were licensing, you went, this is stuff we have to be aware of. This is stuff we have to look out for. This is how we need to set ourselves up for continued success in the future. And I think that's something that a lot of people will just discount when it comes to licensing and patenting. They go, well, no. I'll be successful now. And it's like, you still got to work at it. It's not a golden egg. You don't kill that goose, but you have to work at it. You have to cook, and you have to make sure that you're giving your business the feast it needs to thrive and grow.
Absolutely. That's well put.
Again, Tom, thank you so much for kind of coming in, giving this just overview about why people should be interested in licensing, what it does for a business, but if nothing else, just kind of some of the pitfalls to be aware of, some of the things to know, some of the things that could potentially impact that in the future, and recognizing those risks and coming up with some sort of strategy to mitigate them. Whenever we share this out, I'll make sure to connect it with both you and Pajarito Powder. And if people are interested in finding out more about your organization or potential partnerships, would it be fine for them to reach out to you?
It would, and there's a number of ways to do that. Our website is a great reference, and we have a contact page there, and so they can email, and then we'll be able to see that and get it to the right folks. We're very active on LinkedIn as well, and so looking at our LinkedIn profiles and following some of those posts would be good ways to be able to see what we're up to as well. So I could rattle off my email address here, but I think if folks just go to the website, which is pajaritopowder.com, the key is I will spell Pajarito, Pajarito, powder, all one word. Then they'll be able to see what we're up to and be able to get in touch with us, which we would be delighted to have people get in touch if there's good opportunities for partnering.
Great. And in the description of the video, I'll make sure that, that URL is put in there, so people they don't have to scrub through and go, was that a J or an H?
Do that, back that up again.
Yeah.
Do that
just
3
keep
times.
scrubbing back through and forth on YouTube.
Right.
Well, thank you again, Tom. We greatly appreciate it. And we hope that this information was valuable to all of you watching as you're thinking about, should I be interested in licensing? What could licensing do for my business? And can it help me grow and take my innovation to the next stage?